Welcome to an episode of Matt's Dream Outside here on YouTube. This is going to be part of a fishing series where I give fishing tips and or just film a fun fishing trip. It's going to happen every Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and sit back, enjoy this video, learn a little bit about fishing here in the early springtime / late winter. Tip number 1 is don't be afraid to work around in different areas with your fishing pole. Make sure you cast and hit every different area you can within reason. Tip number 2 is look for those dark spots along the riverbank. Usually those dark spots are deeper than other parts of the riverbank or even other riverbanks, so they're good bets to find trout and fish, because fish like burrowing in those dark, deep pockets along the bank. Tip number 3 is try to cast around white foam, because that's where any bugs or food the fish eat go. Tip number 4 is don't be afraid to cast onto a rock with your lure and let the lure fall off of the rock so that it naturally just kind of goes right in the water without making much of a disturbance. It's a stealthier way than to just chuck your lure on top of the water, which could scare fish away. Tip number 5 is when you're fishing in close to freezing temperatures, use a pole that has guides that aren't aluminum, so like carbon or whatever other kind, even fiberglass, whatever kind of rod guide that's not aluminum will eliminate freezing as much as it would if you were using aluminum rod guides. That's important because the less time you have to spend clearing ice off your guides or using ice off paste, the more time you have to fish. Tip number 6 is that when the water's cold, use a spoon or a jig and use it slowly to match the metabolism of fishes currently in that cold water, so it will seem more natural and get them to bite. Tip number 7 is don't be afraid to fish some of the rushing and gushing water. A lot of times fish will hold over near that rushing and gushing water because it provides more oxygen for them, so you can end up finding a lot of trout, or on a really hot summer day if you're bass fishing, some bass might hold over in there too. In this video, I'm primarily fishing for early spring trout. I'm now switching to my pole with a red jig and a red and white bobber, and I've actually found my tip number 8 is that I've found more luck using a red and white bobber in rivers with a lot of rush to them, because they seem to match the foam and I think look more natural, and they're also cheaper, so just something to be aware of rather than spending money on an expensive trout bobber when you might not need one. Tip number 9 is to mend your bobber and jig. So if you're fishing with a bobber and jig, if you reel in the line when your bobber lands and you keep that line as tight as possible and lift your pole to keep that line off of the water, you can actually keep the bobber floating pretty slow, which will keep the jig in a slow position, which will hopefully allow fish time to go over, swim, look at it, and take it. It's a really effective way to be in control of your bobber and jig, even in pretty high water situations. Tip number 10 is that you can use the current to your advantage to get around obstacles like this rock you're about to see here. Notice how I could cast on the left but reel in on the right, thus avoiding getting my lure stuck on the rock. Tip number 11 is don't be afraid to fish around rocks. A lot of times fish will take breaks by rocks because the rocks kind of act as a break in the current, so it's less stress on the fish. And the fish also like using the rocks as little ambush points for things that might be swimming by. So it's a good bet that if there's a fish around, they could be behind the rocks. Tip number 12, know that in the early time of year, fishing is slow and you might not catch any fish. Tip number 13 is just enjoy the beauty of being outside while you're outside fishing. Tip number 14, just because there's birds doesn't mean there's any fish. I've found that out a lot of times. Thank you for checking out this video. I hope you found it useful. And thank you for checking out the channel. You consider liking, subscribing, or commenting. Have a great day or night.